They were born in the shadows of forgotten neighborhoods, fueled by poverty, exclusion, and the human need to belong. Street gangs didn't just emerge, they erupted, filling the cracks of broken systems with brotherhood, violence, and survival. What began as protection became power, and what began as unity descended into chaos. But like all empires built on shifting ground, they rose and they fell. Street gangs have existed in various forms for centuries, but the modern concept of gangs in the United States began to solidify in the 19th century. In cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago, immigrant communities, particularly Irish, Italian, and later Eastern European, formed tight-knit groups to defend themselves against discrimination, police aggression, and rival ethnic groups. These early gangs were less about organized crime and more about survival in an urban jungle. By the early 20th century, African American and Latino communities in cities like Los Angeles and Chicago began forming their own street organizations. In segregated neighborhoods plagued by redlining, job discrimination, and police brutality, gangs offered structure, identity, and an outlet for frustration. In many cases they mirrored social clubs or community watch groups, only later evolving into more violent and criminally active entities. The 1960s and 70s marked a significant shift in the identity and operations of gangs. As civil rights movements swept the nation, many black and brown street organizations began with political or community-driven goals. The Black Panther Party inspired some gangs to engage in activism, offering free breakfasts, educational programs, and self-defense workshops. However, as government crackdowns intensified and inner-city disinvestment worsened, many of these groups lost their ideological roots. By the 1980s and early 1990s, gangs had become deeply entrenched in the drug trade, particularly with the explosion of crack cocaine. This era saw the rise of infamous gangs like the Bloods and Crips in Los Angeles, the Latin Kings in Chicago, and the Gangster Disciples. Gangs transformed into sophisticated criminal enterprises, with hierarchies, territories, and brutal enforcement methods. Violence escalated, and homicide rates in urban centers surged. The media, meanwhile, sensationalized gang life, turning real suffering into headlines and feeding public panic. Policymakers responded with tough-on-crime legislation that filled prisons with young men of color, often ignoring the root causes of gang proliferation: poverty, institutional racism, and lack of opportunity. By the early 2000s, the iron grip of traditional street gangs began to loosen. Several factors contributed to this decline. First, aggressive policing and federal racketeering laws, commonly known as RICO, dismantled much of the top leadership in major gangs. With figureheads removed, internal fragmentation followed. Younger members often lacked the same loyalty or organizational discipline, leading to splintering and infighting. Second, demographic shifts and gentrification displaced long-standing communities. As urban areas redeveloped, the spatial networks that sustained gangs were disrupted. The internet also changed the game. Newer generations of disaffected youth found validation and identity in online subcultures, often replacing the physical gang with virtual tribes. Community intervention programs, grassroots activism, and shifts in public policy also helped. Former gang members began speaking out, working with at-risk youth, and exposing the realities behind the myth of the glamorous gang life. While traditional street gangs may have lost their centralized power, the conditions that created them still linger. The story of gangs is not simply about crime and punishment, it is about belonging, abandonment, resilience, and despair. Their rise was a symptom, not the disease. And though many have fallen, their legacy continues to shape our cities, our culture, and our understanding of power in the margins. To truly end gang violence, society must treat the wound, not just the infection. It's not enough to dismantle a gang. We must build the communities they once claimed to protect.